The first is to understand left populism as a different thing from right-wing populism. And the second is to understand what happened with the Greek negotiations and Troika, which is the EU plus the IMF. So the first thing about Greece, I'll tell you some stuff that you may already know. If you start getting very bored, let me know. I can change. So for us, the situation that Greece found itself, it was a big shock. Nobody thought that the economic crisis of 2007 and 8 will have an impact on Greece. Back then, I was in Greece and I was discussing and taking interviews with activists, 2008 or 9. And they were saying, come on, Greece is a small country. The whole crisis is not going to have an impact on us. It's not that we have a huge financial sector or anything. Little did we know. So in 2010, it was announced by the then Prime Minister George Papandreou, who was the leader of PASOK, which is the Social Democratic Party in Greece. He announced that we will be under the lending agreements. So we needed to borrow money. Greece didn't have money. We will borrow, but also we will subject it to particular conditions that they come with borrowing this money, and we call this memorandum. So this was 2010. And in that situation, we had two separate problems. One had to do with the debt, that it was too high, much more than in comparison to the GDP. And we had the lending agreements that they had rules in there that they were imposing on austerity in Greece. So effectively you borrow money, but they say, look, but we will tell you how you're going to deal with your economy. Back then, the main parties, progressive parties I'm talking, that was PASOK. PASOK had changed since the 80s when it first came to power, and progressively totally disintegrated, so it's a very small party today. A lot of members of PASOK and a lot of politicians from PASOK have joined Syriza. Some of them not for good reasons, it's just they like a chair and they will go anywhere to get it. So PASOK was declining in terms of members, in terms of voting power. We have the Communist Party of Greece. The Communist Party of Greece, it's like religion in Greece. If you enter, you never come out from it. And it always has the same sort of percentage, 6 to 7%. They say the same things for many years, probably centuries. That's it. And they don't like other people very much. Neither on the left, nor PASOK, nor anybody. And then we had Syriza, which was a very small party, 4% of the vote it had at that point, but it was a coalition of 11 different left-wing organizations. Now the thing is that the reason what enabled these 11 organizations to come together is that a lot of these people were involved in the European Social Forum in the previous decades, so they had met each other, there was less suspicion towards each other, and they formed this coalition at the beginning, which later took legally the form of a party. It became a party. It was registered as a party in 2012, I think, when the elections were coming up and we knew that there was a chance that progressive in Syriza will take power. That was the political map. But apart from that, we had movements, protest movements, and these movements were not organized by Syriza, and the people were very diverse that they were taking part in these protests. So this was the indignant movement. You may have seen pictures in front of Parliament Square, all these people coming together and demonstrating for months. And we have to remember that when I say that it wasn't homogeneous, it means that you had Golden Dawn in there as well. The fascists were demonstrating in there. So it was very diverse. The fascists were saying, yeah, we don't like the political establishment, but it's the fault of the refugees and the migrants. Most of the people were progressive people, however, but they were not going into this demonstration with their party identity. So we didn't have placards that they will say Syriza or this organization or another organization. And because it was so diverse, people were feeling more comfortable to go around and see what is happening, even people that they don't consider themselves being on the left. The reason for this movement is that when the crisis hit us, it wasn't only the working classes that they were suffering. It was felt by the middle classes as well. So people who, up to that point, they were thinking, okay, we are doing fine, we won't have a problem in life. Suddenly, they realized that they may have a problem. So you have a huge shock that is happening in society, in different classes, and this allows the bonds with political affiliations and political parties to be loosened. And the whole demonstrations were against the political establishment, those that they brought us to this situation. Some part of that, it may have been against the political establishment in the European Union as well. As I said, the fascists were there, but the fascists, they were not engaged in other things that they were happening in these demonstrations. So, for example, there were assemblies, people getting together every day and talking. The fascists were not part of that. They were not interested in these discussions. And then we had elections, and then Syriza gains, the demonstrations resided at some point, they lasted 2 or 3 months, and then Syriza got, as the new party, as a new alternative, it got a big part of the vote, and by 2015 it came to power. But it wasn't, the movements are not organized by Syriza. People would see that suspiciously. It was happening from the grassroots, and then Syriza starts gaining electoral power. It's difficult to bring people in a movement if you are a party. Movements are different from parties. They are more loose, the type of organization. They are more inclusive. There are other things that are happening in movements, and I want us to discuss this maybe in relation to Britain as well, and what will it mean for a Labour Party to have a movement. And then immediately we started the negotiations. So there were different demands in this process of negotiations. One was to have a haircut for the debt. There was a previous haircut in 2012, but it benefited mainly private investors, so insurance companies, banks, and things like that. Another, of course, big demand was not to have more austerity, because austerity does not allow society to go on, and society at that point was disintegrating. We didn't want to have surpluses. They were demanding different surpluses that you have to have every year, but the Greek economy was totally destroyed, so you couldn't produce surpluses of 3.5% of the GDP. We didn't want to have pensions cut. We didn't want to have changes in the labour law. Now, through the negotiations, I think the negotiating Greek team realized how difficult things are. And this is where I think we were unprepared as well. I happen to know some of the people that they were in the negotiating team. This was done last minute, and the people who went there, they were not really negotiators. What do I mean by that? I was discussing with Daniel about Varoufakis. Varoufakis may be a very good economist, and he may have some very interesting ideas. What I perceive from him when I see him speaking is that he is a very difficult human being and a very narcissistic. And I think this played out in the negotiations as well. It is difficult to have a negotiation if you put somewhere in there which will go and say, fuck you. It's nice for all of us, and we appreciate that, and it's nice to have somebody to stick a figure up to them, but it makes the negotiating process much more difficult. And I think this happened in that case. I'm saying that because I remember a few days ago, was it Farage that he went to the European Parliament and he was telling everybody off because of Trump's election. This is not good. You don't try to piss off people necessarily before you start a negotiation. I'm quite bad with negotiations as well, and I have been negotiating for my union. The accusation towards me was that whenever I go into a negotiation, I talk to the opposite side as if they're shit, which I enjoy. Other people enjoy that as well. But maybe I'm not the person that you want to have at the front of a negotiation. So the negotiation started, we had to deal with all these issues, and I think we were unprepared in the sense that we were thinking, okay, we will go there, we will explain the situation and why austerity is not working and where society is, and they will have to give some concessions. Yeah, it doesn't work like that. We've learned in the process. And also, it seemed that what the negotiating team had at the back of their mind is that if we played that we are going to leave the Eurozone, they will give in. And it's not going to happen that easily. And I think we will see that in the negotiations that they will happen in Britain as well. So as a team, looking back to that, I don't think we had realized where we were going and how difficult it would have been. When the thing started to get very, very difficult, the Greek government called for a referendum. Again, that was another way of giving them the finger, but now as the popular mandate. And the negotiation wasn't about leaving the Eurozone or the European Union. The negotiation was about accepting or not the austerity conditions that the lending agreement wanted to impose on Greece, and 62% of the people voted no. I didn't even believe that 62% of the people would vote no. It was so much the pressure and the insecurity that everybody was feeling at that point that I was thinking, no, I don't think we are going to win that. But we did win it. We did win it, and it was again seen as a negotiating card. Look, we have the people behind us, they don't want austerity. It didn't work. Everybody watched the end of the negotiations in July 15, where the proposal was beyond belief terrible. The first proposal that the first draft of what they were proposing for Greece, which included a clause which was asking for Greek assets, national assets, to be transferred in a company in Luxembourg, which Schäuble, the German financial minister, had a connection. So it was beyond belief. It was amazingly undemocratic in so many different ways. Still, at that point, they cut liquidity in Greece. That means you couldn't go to the bank and get money out. Think what that meant for the people who had shops or they had to pay for goods. Even if you were a business, you couldn't transfer money. You couldn't get money from the machine or the bank and pay your suppliers, but also for your family. So there was a minimum imposed, how much money you could get out every week, but this was amazingly stressful. Imagine people that they had their savings in the bank as well. Amazingly stressful situation. And they did it because they knew how much that would pressurize Greece and the people of Greece. So at that point, we accepted a memorandum agreement. It happened on 12th of July, but for a lot of us, that meant something about where the European Union was at that point. And what it made visible is the huge difference that existed between the people of Europe and the European elites, let's say. And what do I mean by that? In the process of the negotiation, whenever the Greek government was saying, look, we have to find a solution, and it is a political issue, the reply was that you don't understand very good our economics, and also that the European Union has its experts. And it did have some very good experts, that they understand the economic aspects of everything, but it was a political issue. If you treat the people of the EU like that, if these negotiations that they were so visible across Europe, you show that you don't give a shit if the people are dying, you have a problem. And your problem will be political, and we have this problem, the political problem. And I think this is part, not because of what other people say it has to do with the EU institutions, but it has to do with who has been occupying the European institutions for a very long time. And these are right-wing, neoliberal governments that they were pushing their agenda. By the way, the Tory governments were also involved and pushing towards that direction, even if they are not in the Eurozone. And they didn't want to change this political narrative that they had. Austerity is going to work, we are going to impose austerity. This is the only solution, which created a huge difference and gap with the demands of the people, but also it showed how important and how wrong we were that we had allowed these institutions for 30, 40 years to be occupied by right-wing governments. Schäuble was terrible in these negotiations. At some point he said, after the Greek referendum, well, you can go on voting as much as you like, we have rules, we don't care. So having the finance minister dealing with this situation and telling in the face who gives a fuck about democracy, and the whole of the world watching that, it's a big problem. At the same time, of course, some people would say, why didn't Greece leave the Eurozone? That wasn't part, first of all, of what most of the people of Greece would have voted for. There are different reasons there. Some of these reasons are historical. Greece was always feeling between the East and the West, and we always wanted to be with the West. And in our minds, this is Europe, being part of Europe and the institutions of the European Union. So even at that point, if you had asked people if they want to leave, they would have said no. Another reason, which again, I don't think I can explain very well in Britain, is that we are the frontiers of the European Union. We are the borders. And the borders are quite unstable. And our neighbor is Erdogan and Turkey. And anything that it will create a big chaos in Greece, it can be immediately have other reactions from Erdogan and so on. I don't know what will be his reactions, but if you are amongst enemies, that would be a very good movement to make a move. And Erdogan is getting worse and worse and worse by the day. I think we will have this problem in the area because of Trump as well. And we had the refugee crisis at the same time. And the refugee crisis, again, which has to do with the relationship with Erdogan, it means that if you leave the European Union, you don't even have to go into economics in order for them to pressurize you to accept certain policies. You are left without any help with the refugees, and they block the borders. That's it. That's enough to create chaos and have the fascists taking over. So there were many, many different reasons why I think this idea that we should leave the European Union and the Eurozone wasn't on the cards. Varoufakis had a plan. I tell you why I didn't like his plan. His plan was about parallel currency. Experiments of parallel currency, they exist in Britain as well. So Brixton has its own pound, which is a currency that it is used for within Brixton. So the ideas of Varoufakis were coming from that, but for me the problem wasn't the euro. Even if you had at that point reversed to drachma, it would be so much devaluated. The debt would still be there. we wouldn't be able to come out in the markets as well, there will be no investment, it wouldn't save the situation. At the same time, it exposed a lot of the structural problems within the Eurozone. And it exposed how the Eurozone was divided between some core countries and Germany in them that benefited from the crisis, and the rest of us, that we are something like colonies of the others. Portugal, Spain, Greece, and so on. And these are serious problems for the Eurozone and for the European Union as well. What was Syriza's point at that moment? The point was that, okay, we accept the deal, the memoranda. Progressively, we'll see more progressive governments coming to power. Spain would have been the big thing. And then we create a bloc within the European Union, a bloc which will cut probably across parties, so you can have alliances with social democratic parties, the European left, the Greens, and so on. And from within, we start putting more pressure to change this balance of powers. I think in some way we were still waiting for that, but I don't see it happening. One of the reasons is, in politics there is timing, and for me timing for Spain to change and us having to say something different for the European Union was a year and a half ago, when Podemos could have had a coalition with PSOE, which is the Social Democratic Party. And this didn't happen. Still, there is no solution. Probably there will be another election. PSOE is not doing very well. It's going something that Labour went through to see if there will be another leadership election within the party. But I don't think it will be possible to remove Rajoy anytime soon. So the dream of Syriza that we bring out left-leaning social democratic governments that they will speak out against austerity never materialized. There was a symbolic move from the part of Syriza a few months ago in summer to have a summit of the Southern European countries, which we did. And it was held in Athens. And the idea there is, again, that you bring those that they were most affected, like Spain, Italy, Portugal, together to create another bloc within the European Union. Spain still has Rajoy. Portugal is very small. It was more a symbolic thing rather than anything else. But it was also a response to another division that exists within the European Union, which has to do with the right-wing countries coming together, Czech Republic and so on the refugee crisis and putting up borders. Divisions within the European Union. And these divisions, they became more visible with the refugee crisis. When you have the Visegrad group with the Czech Republic and so on, Austria creating their own summits, meeting together before there is a decision from the European Union on refugees in order to block a European solution to the problem. So the divisions are there. And of course divisions that made a lot of people, and probably they had something to do with Brexit as well, when you see that in the European Union you have institutions, and I'm talking about the European Central Bank in this case, and it is within the treaties of the European Union that the European Central Bank has a neutral role and is managing the crisis for the best of the European Union as a whole. In that point, however, when they stopped liquidity in Greece, it showed that it can become a political organ if neoliberal forces are in power. And progressively, a lot of people are skeptical about the European Union. And it doesn't have to do with the institutions, I insist on that. If you look at the treaties of the European Union, it says all the good stuff, that the European Union is there to protect the rights of people and so on. This is the legal aspect of it, what is in the treaties. The political, though, is something different. How you are going to read any political treaty, document, law, it's always up to interpretation. And I insist on that the worst thing is that we've allowed right-wing governments to be in power across Europe for that long. So, when I was here and I was discussing Brexit, I had a very difficult position. And I had a very difficult position which I think it is close to what Corbyn had to face. And I opened one meeting with him as well on the European Union, that we were trying to promote an argument which is not so straightforward. It says, we don't like austerity, we don't like neoliberalism, we understand that if you have a neoliberal EU, it's problematic, but we want to stay in and fight. It's not as straightforward as saying, look at all these Polish people that they are coming here and taking our jobs. So it was this more difficult argument. And I was going around and everywhere in Britain, and the discussion showed how uninformed, on the one hand, were the people about the EU matters and the role of the media in that. So everywhere people will say, oh, but the European Union is so undemocratic. For me, this is a joke. It is a joke if I hear it for, and excuse me, but I'm a Republican. If I hear that in England and we have the House of Lords, and even if you don't put the House of Lords there, we have the City of London lobbying and doing whatever they want. So it was problematic. And of course, it showed that people hadn't think of the role of European Parliament and the European elections. It showed that people don't understand that the Council is the heads of state of all this, so you cannot say they are unelected, and how the Commission was supposed to work, and you can help me with that if I say something you disagree, that the Commission is supposed to be the civil service, as you have a civil service that you don't want it intervening in the actual electoral politics. And again, the President of the Commission, there was an election. So you have these institutions, they are not in themselves undemocratic. What it is undemocratic is that if you allow them to be in the hands of right-wing people, they will use it in particular ways. In terms of democracy and legitimacy and so on, there was a big problem. There was a problem with labor rights, that people in these debates were thinking that no, we are better off in Greece than in the European Union, without understanding that the European Union law on labor rights, it puts a minimum that we can accept. We can build on that, we can do much better, but you need a minimum protection. And the protection that we have within the European Union is particular, about particular rights. For example, protecting atypical workers, and let's not forget how austerity is impacting on women, on part-time employees, and on people who are on fixed-term contracts. I want to pause here and tell you another story. When I told you about the negotiations I was in, it was about a directive from the EU, I think it was 2004, which was offering protection to fixed-term and part-time contracts. And I started this in universities because universities use quite a lot of employees in these terms on part-time and fixed-term contracts or hourly contracts. And that was quite early days back then. So the union was also saying, oh, but you are the first who's trying to do it where we are going. Fast forward 4 or 5 years, and the answer, which management didn't have that answer back then because they haven't thought of that yet, it was 0-hour contracts. The first time I came across 0-hour contracts, it was in Britain. Now they have been exported as a solution to Greece as well. And it was the answer to the directives that we had from the European Union. Other things, of course, privatizations. And again, it shows how we have all of us to work out a lot of issues. When I was listening to people saying, oh, but they are pushing privatizations in Greece. Of course, they are pushing, and unfortunately the privatizations go on. But a lot of these privatizations, we are bought by national companies, Chinese national companies. They bought the Piraeus port, for example, 67% of the Piraeus port. So, when people are saying that nationalizations are not allowed within the EU, they are misreading something, again, that the neoliberalism wants to privatize and everything. The legislation has to do with monopolies, not allowing monopolies, and it can be used as blocking privatizations. But let's not forget that a lot of, I think my line going to Norwich, it is owned by a national company, I can't remember of this, which country now. So again, a lot of things that they were said about the European Union, and this is what we failed to do at that point, to explain how these problems are problems because you have right-wing governments across Europe and they have taken over and direct some of the anger of the people towards neoliberalism in Britain. They have played a role, they have pushed privatizations, they have pushed austerity and cuts and so on. So instead of attacking the Tories, as we should be doing, and this is what they managed to do in the case of the EU very well, it was deflected towards the European Union. And now we are here. And now we face a very difficult situation because apart from the class analysis that a lot of people are doing, saying we are disconnected with working class communities, it seems that there are a lot of other divisions are at play. So there are divisions between cities and rural areas. There are educational divisions, though that they have been in college and those who haven't. Of course, there are divisions that they have to do with those that they were left behind with globalization and others that they benefited. But there are too many divisions that we have to deal with in these countries, and we have to think how we are going to go forward and manage these divisions. I don't think we can just reconnect with the working classes, that is it. The election of Trump in the US is not helping us. It's a much more generalized discourse that it is winning, right-wing populism, which is against immigration and against women and so on. But it is something new. It's not what we had in the past. It seems that people who voted for Brexit, or they were promoted Brexit here, and the Trump camp are creating something new, which is against neoliberalism in a way. So it is national capitalism with a protectionist hue on there, defining our people, dividing them from the other people. The others in the US context are too many others: migrants, refugees, women, homosexuals, everybody that Trump doesn't like. But they are promoting this new thing. Yes, globalization was bad. Yes, neoliberalism was bad. Let's go back to our national borders and protect our people. Obviously, they are not going to protect us as their people. Their people are in the city of London. Another fantastic institution which has a medieval structure. Another institution, while we are discussing here, they are lobbying about their passporting rights. And they have the money to have the lobbyists to put a lot of pressure on British Parliament as well. So we are in a very difficult conjunction. I think maybe things will get worse before they get better. One of the problems is that we didn't have here the same shock that we had in Greece. The second problem is that people, apart from us, that we spend our Saturday here, they don't like discussing politics. And why should they? I mean, politics can be seen as boring. People want to bring up their children, go to football, get a pint. Yeah? So that should say something to us. We cannot always go around and say, oh, but if we discuss rationally with people, they will understand. What we see so far is that very irrational people, orange people like Trump, with very rational arguments, they grasped something of how people were feeling. They capitalized on the anger of the people, which was going in other direction. But this should make us think how we involve people. People may not want to go to meetings, but you can involve people in other ways. In Greece, when after the indignant movements, a lot of people got involved in solidarity networks. Again, without a party ID, people in neighborhoods were coming together, creating food banks, social clinics, and so on. The important thing at that point is that people felt comfortable to go in. They felt that they can go in and nobody will lecture them about their politics. And they were talking about, okay, how do we manage to help the most vulnerable? How do we get connected without the idea of a party doing that? And this is going on today as well. But the shock was so big that everybody started to think of alternative ways of doing economics. For example, you had the creation of a lot of cooperatives. And I sent Daniel a film which is about mainly eco-communities, cooperatives that they were created as a response to the crisis. This is also important, putting forward different economic logics as well and engaging people, but as jobs, as something that you actually do rather than just philosophizing about politics. I don't think in Britain we are there yet. But at the same time, we should not forget that if anybody has this tradition, it's Britain. Sometimes I feel British people are looking very much outside to get ideas. And I think one of the main victories of right-wing politics in Britain is that they have disassociated us from our radical tradition. And it is here, cooperatives. We are talking in Greece about cooperatives as if we invented them. And here we had a whole movement and a party, and it is part of labor and so on. So we have to re-invoke our radical traditions rather than all the time, let's find something new, let's find something new. And also connect with people, but in a way that engages their feelings as well, rather than rational debate about politics. As I said, I don't think we are there yet, but I think we will be soon. There will be a recession with Brexit. I think this is unavoidable. Maybe it will be managed, but there will be one. And this is our moment to talk to the people across classes and reconnect with them in a meaningful way. Thank you.